"Sir, I need to review your luggage again. Something is not right here," the security officer Roberts announced, pointing to Rafael Mendoza's leather bag. It was the third magazine in less than an hour at Miami International Airport, and all other passengers had been released for a long time. Rafael remained motionless, observing how his documentation was spread through the metal table for the fifth time. At 45, Mexican-born mechanical engineer had become naturalized American 15 years ago, but his appearance and accent still caused additional checks whenever they traveled to work. "This passport looks suspicious," murmured Agent Wilson, examining the document with unnecessary magnifying glass. "And these roles, what exactly do you do?" "I'm chief engineer at Boeing's turbine division," Rafael replied calmly for the sixth time. His eyes, however, showed no irritation. There was a strange serenity there, as if he already expected exactly that. The passenger line behind him grew, and the murmurs of impatience began to echo through the terminal. An elderly lady shook her head with disapproval. "Why do they always stop these people? This is ridiculous." What no one knew was that Rafael had discreetly documented each of these special checks in the last 6 months. Each photo, each conversation recorded on its smartwatch, every witness, all meticulously catalogued in a digital folder that no one imagined existing. "I'll have to call my supervisor," said Roberts, louder than necessary. "This kind of situation requires special protocol." Rafael nodded patiently, his hands crossed over his chest. For a moment, an almost imperceptible smile was allowed. 16 years projecting systems that kept millions of safe people in the skies, and there was being treated as a threat for carrying the same documents he presented every week. While waiting, Rafael discreetly observed the surrounding movement. Families gathering, executives running to their flights, tourists taking selfies, an airport full of people living their lives normally while he remained there, being verified for the 100th time. The supervisor Morrison approached an expression that mixed boredom and automatic authority. "What's the problem here, Roberts?" "Documentation suspicious, sir. And look only at these technical roles. Very complex for someone." Morrison interrupted the phrase by noticing that Rafael watched him with absolute attention. What these agents didn't know was that the suspect they searched had personally designed the security systems of 3 of the largest airports in the country. Ironic how life can sometimes be. "I will need to photograph these documents to our database," Wilson announced, clearly prolonging the procedure unnecessarily. Other passengers sighed loudly, some checking watches with increasing impatience. A young executive in line commented loudly, "That's ridiculous. Why do they always stop the same people? There is obviously something wrong there." His words echoed through the terminal, generating murmurs of agreement. Rafael remained impassive, but his fingers discreetly adjusted smartwatch, such a subtle movement that no one realized that one more interaction was being documented and transmitted in real time to a safe server. Morrison returned with an expression of exaggerated authority. "Mr. Mendoza, we will need a more detailed interview. Follow me to the interrogation room." "Interrogation?" Rafael repeated calmly, his voice echoing loud enough to dozens of people here. "For loading Boeing work documents?" The word Boeing caused a small revocation among nearby passengers. Some began to look more carefully, realizing that perhaps that situation was not as simple as it seemed. "It's standard protocol," Morrison replied defensively, his voice betraying a growing nervousness in the face of the attention that the situation was attracting. Rafael nodded serenely, gathering his documents with methodical accuracy. "Of course, protocol." His voice carried such subtle irony that only attentive listeners captured. As he walked toward the living room, Rafael allowed for an inner smile. 16 years protecting American air safety, and there was being escorted as a threat. But different from the other times, today would be different. Today they would find out exactly who they were moving. In the pocket of his jacket, his phone vibrated discreetly, a message that confirmed that everything was being broadcast live to very important people, people who would soon be making some urgent connections. There, in the face of all the eyes of curiosity and judgment, Rafael remained firm as those who keep a secret too powerful to be revealed before the right time. If this heist diary of prejudice and overcoming your heart, be sure to subscribe to the channel to find out how a simple moment of discrimination would become the catalyst of a revelation that no one would ever forget. The interrogation room of the airport was small, cold, and deliberately intimidating. Morrison closed the door harder than necessary, while Wilson spread Rafael's documents on the metal table with evident contempt. "So, sir, Mendoza," Morrison pronounced the surname as if it were something unpleasant. "You claim to work for Boeing 16, but these documents seem suspects." Rafael remained quietly, observing how they handled their engineering certificates as if they were criminal evidence. "Suspects in what respect exactly?" "Well, for starters, Wilson intervened with a mischievous smile. What kind of Mexican works with aircraft turbines? Isn't that more likely to be gardening? Cleaning? Something more, right? The racist offense echoed through the small room like a slap in the face. Raphael felt the familiar burning of humiliation, but this time something was different. This time he was prepared. I understand your confusion, Raphael replied with a disconcerting calm. I imagine it is hard to accept that someone with my appearance may have projected the systems that ensure that their flights will safely reach their destination. Morrison hit the table. Attitude will not help you here, friend. We have the authority to stop you indefinitely if we consider you a threat to national security. What they didn't know was that Raphael had methodically documented each of these discriminatory interactions in the last 6 months. Not just theirs, but dozens of other airport agents across the country. His smartwatch discreetly continued to recording, transmitting everything to a safe server he had configured himself. Look at these rolls, mocking Wilson, shaking the technical projects in the air. Who do you think you're fooling, this engineer farce? Probably don't even know how to read it right. Raphael allowed an almost imperceptible smile. Those papers were technical specifications of a new airport safety system that he had developed in person, a system that could ironically avoided exactly the kind of discrimination that was suffering at that time. Do you have family? Raphael asked suddenly, changing the subject apparently randomly. Morrison frowned. What kind of question is this? Just curiosity? Do you frequently fly? They take your families on trips? This is not your business, Wilson replied, clearly bothered by the change of tone. Raphael nodded thoughtfully. It's just that I was wondering if you would trust your lives to the security systems that someone like me projected. Apparently the answer is yes. Every week, actually. Confidence in the faces of the two agents has faltered for a moment. There was something in Raphael's voice, a quiet certainty that didn't match the threat image they had built mentally. No more conversation, Morrison stated, clearly losing patience. You will stay here until we can check each of these fake documents. In Raphael's pocket, his phone was discreetly vibrated, a message that confirmed that live broadcast was being received, not only by the lawyers he had hired, but also by some of the most important executives in the American aerospace industry, people who would soon be making very urgent calls to Miami Airport. Raphael crossed his hands on the table and smiled serenely. Sure, I have all the time in the world. His voice carried such subtle irony that only very attentive ears could capture. What those agents could not realize was that every insult, every act of discrimination, was being carefully cataloged and transmitted in real time, and that on the other side of this broadcast, some of the most powerful people of American aviation were beginning to recognize exactly who was being humiliated in that room. Outside the room, a small multitude of passengers began to form. The delay was creating cascade delays, and irritation grew exponentially. Some executives checked expensive watches, tourists canceled connections, families lost important appointments. How long will this take? He shouted a businessman through the room window. This kind of procedure is ridiculous. Morrison left the room briefly to calm his spirits, leaving Wilson alone with Raphael. It was then that the agent made his most serious mistake. Do you know what your problem is? Wilson leaned over the table, his voice laden with poison. You think you can come here and pretend to be the same as us, but they will always be what they are. Immigrants trying to bake by real Americans. Raphael remained motionless, but something changed in his eyes, a cold intensity that Wilson was unable to play correctly. Interesting perspective, Raphael answered calmly. And what defines a real American in your opinion? Wilson laughed with contempt. Oh, now you want to pretend you don't understand? People like you will always be suspicious, it's the reality. What Wilson didn't know was that each word was being recorded not only by Raphael's smartwatch, but also by the room's own safety system, a system that Raphael had helped to project 2 years earlier as an airport consultant. Raphael was allowed a genuine smile for the first time. People like me? Exactly. Mexicans, Arabs, anyone who doesn't seem reliable. My job is to protect this country from people like you. The irony was so brutal that Raphael almost laughed out loud. There was a man whose life depended daily on the security systems Raphael had created, calling him a national threat. Morrison returned with an even more annoyed expression. The situation out there is getting out of control. Let's accelerate that. I already finished the check, lied Wilson. Definitely false documentation. I will recommend prolonged detention for complete investigation. Raphael nodded serenely. Sure. Just a question before that. Have you heard of the Skynet project? The two agents were confused. What project? It is an integrated monitoring system that connects airports, military bases, and real-time command centers. Very advanced, very confined. It allows communications tracking, automatic recordings, behavioral analysis. Morrison frowned. Why are you talking about it? Raphael looked straight at the security camera in the corner of the room. Only curiosity about how technology can be revealing. At that moment, Morrison's phone rang. He answered with irritation. Miami Airport, Morrison talking. The voice on the other side was so tall that Raphael was able to hear clearly. Here is Director Harrison of Boeing Integrated Systems. I need to talk to you about an engineer named Rafael Mendoza. Now. Morrison's face paled visibly. Wilson stopped moving the papers, finally realizing that something was terribly wrong. Raphael remained sitting, his hands crossed, observing how reality began to collapse around the two men who had spent the last minute humiliating him. Each new humiliation only fed something within Raphael that his oppressors could not see, a silent force being nourished by his own injustice they tried to impose, preparing for a revelation that would forever change the lives of all present in that room. Block 3. Secret preparation of the protagonist plus allies. Here is Director Harrison of Boeing Systems Integrated. The voice across the phone cut the air from the room like a sharp blade. I need to talk to you about an engineer named Rafael Mendoza. Now. Morrison held the phone with trembling hands, his face losing all the color. Sir, can I ask what it is specifically? It is about you being questioning the head of engineering of our most critical airport division in the United States. The man who has designed the systems you use to protect this country. Wilson dropped the papers he held. The brutal irony of the situation began to penetrate its small minds as cold water. There must be some mistake, stammered Morrison. This individual presented suspicious documentation and suspect? Harrison's voice exploded over the phone. Are you calling suspicion the documentation of a man who has a Delta-level clearance of the Defense Department, who works directly with NASA and Pentagon? Raphael remained sitting calmly, observing how the world of those two men began to collapse in real time. His smartwatch had broadcast everything live not only to Harrison, but to a network of strategic contacts he had grown for 16 brilliant career years. Outside the room, the situation was becoming unsustainable. More than 50 passengers were waiting, flights were being lost, and the airport management began to receive furious airline calls on cascade delays. Put me on the Vive, Harrison ordered. I want to talk directly to Raphael. Morrison obeyed with trembling fingers. Raphael, here is Director Harrison. I'm seeing everything through the transmission of your smartwatch. My lawyers are already on the way. Raphael smiled serenely. Hello, David. How is the family? Casual familiarity between the two was like a stomach punch to Wilson and Morrison. It was not just boss and subordinate. It was a genuine friendship built over years of joint work in projects QEU saved lives daily. Linda is furious, said Harrison. When I learned that they were treating you as a terrorist, it almost took the private jet to fly so far in person. Wilson's phone rang. He was his direct supervisor, probably receiving pressure on the situation he was running from control. He answered nervously. Wilson, here is Commander Peters. I have just received a call from the Internal Security Secretary. What the hell are you doing with Rafael Mendoza? Raphael's network of contacts was impressive. For 16 years, he had worked quietly with some of the most important names of American national security, people who depended on their systems to protect millions of lives daily. Raphael, Harrison continued through the vivos, I need you to know that I triggered the Alpha Protocol. In 15 minutes, representatives of the Internal Security Department will be there for a full review of the procedures on this airport. Morrison swallowed hard. A DHS review could mean the end of their careers, millionaire fines for the airport, and a federal investigation into discriminatory practices. Wilson hung up his phone, his face completely white. Morrison, we're in trouble. My supervisor said she has already received calls from 3 different senators. Raphael had spent 6 months documenting meticulously not only his own experiences, but creating a network of evidence that exposed systematic standards of racial discrimination at the airport. Each recording, every photo, every witness had been carefully cataloged. Mr. Mendoza, Morrison tried a last desperate approach. Maybe we can solve it. Friendly. They were just routine checks. Raphael looked directly at him. Routine checks? How to call Mexicans gardeners and question if I can read my own projects. The silence in the room was deafening. They did not know that everything had been recorded and broadcast live. Outside, the noise of quick steps echoed through the hallway. 3 people in dark suits approached. Raphael's lawyers, sent not only by Boeing, but by the law firm that represented some of the biggest names in the aerospace industry. Dr. Sarah Chen, the main lawyer, knocked on the door. Raphael, we are from Morrison and Associates. We came to pick him up. The irony of the surname identical to that of the agent did not go unnoticed. Wilson looked at Morrison with growing panic. Raphael got up calmly, adjusting his jacket. Gentlemen, it was educational. Harrison was still on the lively. Raphael, the transmission is being analyzed by our legal team. Let's make sure it never happens to anyone. For a moment, when Raphael was preparing to leave, Wilson and Morrison realized that they had made the most serious mistake of their professional careers. Not only had they humiliated an innocent man, they had attacked someone protected by the highest levels of the U.S. government. But they still didn't know that the true impact of their actions was just beginning. Raphael had prepared something that would forever transform how discrimination was treated at that airport. 3 dark men entered the room like a silent tsunami. The first presented himself as Agent Thompson of the Department of Internal Security. Behind him, Dr. Sarah Chen was holding a bulky folder and a tablet displaying data that made Morrison and Wilson pale instantly. "Mr. Mendoza," Agent Thompson greeted Raphael respectfully. "I deeply regret this situation. Secretary Mayfield sent us personally to escort him." The transformation in the room was dramatic. Seconds earlier, Raphael was treated as a terrorist. Now federal agents went to him with the deference reserved only for people of clearance maximo. Morrison tried to intervene desperately. "Agents, there was a misunderstanding. We only followed standard protocol." "Standard protocol?" Dr. Chen opened the tablet, revealing the live broadcast that had captured all discrimination. "Is calling a chief engineer of the Gardner Boeing is standard protocol?" Wilson's voice cracks. "We didn't know. The documents," Agent Thompson interrupted coldly, "belong to the man who designed the security system you use right now to protect this airport." Raphael remained silent, observing how his oppressors discovered the magnitude of his error. 16 years old, building lives that saved lives, and they treated him like trash because of his appearance. Dr. Chen became the tablet to show a screen full of notifications. "Mr. Mendoza, while you interrogated you, your recordings were automatically transmitted to our office, to Boeing, to 3 senators of the Transport Committee, and to the own Secretary of Internal Security." Morrison clung to the table, her legs failing. This can't be happening." "It's happening," Raphael replied calmly, talking for the first time since the agents arrived. "For 6 months I systematically documenting as I am treated at this airport. Every insult, every humiliation, every moment of discrimination was recorded and cataloged." Agent Thompson opened a second folder. "We find evidence of a systematic standard of racial discrimination at this airport. 23 cases documented in the last 6 months alone." Wilson tried one last pathetic defense. "Lord, we just have superior orders." "Superior orders?" Dr. Chen laughed with bitterness. "We have recordings of you inventing non-existent suspicions, prolonging procedures unnecessarily, and using openly racist language." Raphael got up and walked to the room window, where dozens of passengers were still waiting. "Do you know what is ironic? These same passengers fly daily on airplanes whose safety systems I have designed, trust their lives to my work, but they treat me as a threat because of the color of my skin." Morrison fell into the chair, finally realizing the complete destruction of his career. "Mr. Mendoza, we can solve this." "Solve?" Raphael turned slowly. "Do you think racial humiliation is something that is solved with an apology?" Agent Thompson continued. "Both are suspended immediately. A complete federal investigation will be conducted, and the airport will face fines that can reach tens of millions." Outside, the buzz grew. Passengers began to realize that something extraordinary was happening when they saw federal agents respectfully escorting the man who was moments before was treated as a criminal. Dr. Chen showed the phone to Morrison. 3 airlines have already canceled contracts with this airport. Social networks are exploding with somewhere Justica para Raphael. The public humiliation Raphael suffered for months was now being returned exponentially to his oppressors, but fairly and based on irrefutable evidence. "Secretary Mayfield wants to see him personally tomorrow," Agent Thompson reported Raphael, "to discuss national implementation of its anti-discrimination protocols." Wilson began to cry silently. 16 years of career destroyed in an hour of documented prejudice. Raphael looked at the 2 men who had turned their work trips into systematic nightmares. "The final irony? You gave me exactly the evidence I needed to change this system forever." Dr. Chen closed the folder with satisfaction. Recordings are already being used to train agents in other airports about what not to do. While Raphael was respectfully escorted out of the room, Morrison and Wilson remained sitting in deadly silence, realizing that their racial arrogance had just destroyed not only their careers but potentially their whole lives. But the true magnitude of the transformation that Raphael would provoke was just beginning. Outside that room, something historical was about to happen, something that would change forever how discrimination was treated at American airports. 3 years later, Raphael was walking through the same corridor of Miami International Airport, but this time escorted by the airport's own director, who treated him with the deference reserved for important dignitaries. "Mr. Mendoza, it is an honor to receive him again," said the director Harrison nervously. "The new protocol you have developed has already been implemented in 42 American airports." Raphael smiled cordially. His resignation from Boeing had lasted exactly 3 days, enough time for 7 of the world's largest aerospace companies to begin a war of offers to hire him. Now, as an airport security consultant for the U.S. Department of Transportation, his salary had tripled. "The Mendoza system of anti-discrimination monitoring is working perfectly," continued Harrison, showing digital panels installed throughout the terminal. "Cases of racial discrimination have fallen 94% since implementation. Wilson and Morrison? Well, their trajectories took very different directions. Wilson now worked as a security guard at a suburban mall, still struggling against labor processes that would drain their economies for the next 10 years. Morrison had been forced to sell her home to pay the lawyers, now living in a small apartment with her family destroyed by the scandal. But the true transformation was cultural. The video of the discrimination, broadcast live and later viral with more than 50 million views, became mandatory material for training PA security agents across the country. Justica Raphael was not just a hashtag. It became a national movement. Raphael's story had spread far beyond airports. Universities studied their case in human rights courses, business schools used their example as a leadership in crisis management, and their autobiography, From Prejudice to Progress, had remained 18 on the best-selling list of New York Times. Dr. Sarah Chen, now Raphael's partner in his consulting firm, approached a tablet. The latest statistics, reports of racial discrimination at airports increased 300%, but only because now people have the courage to report, and the satisfactory resolution rate is 97%. What impressed most was the international reach. 15 countries had requested consulting to implement adapted versions of the Mendoza system on their own airports. Its history had become a global symbol of how to turn injustice into systematic change. Raphael observed the movement of the airport. Families of all ethnic groups by embarking quietly, various executives running to their flights, tourists from different countries being treated with universal respect. The system that he had created not only detected real-time discrimination, but also automatically educated agents about unconscious biases. 3 senators called me yesterday, Dr. Chen continued. They want to expand the system to all entry points in the country, terrestrial borders, ports, consulates, and the Secretary of State confirmed, "You will be appointed Special Ambassador to Travelers' Rights." The final irony was delicious. The man Wilson and Morrison considered not American enough had created the system that now protected the dignity of millions of immigrants and visitors, ensuring that the American promise of equality was actually fulfilled. As he went through the exact point where he had been humiliated, Raphael saw a discreet sign installed on the wall, "Center of Dignity and Respect, Raphael Mendoza. Every passenger deserves to be treated with equality and respect." A young Latin family was quietly undergoing security, being treated with the same courtesy as any other passenger. The father smiled, grateful to Raphael, not knowing that this man had made it possible for his family to travel without fear of discrimination. "Did you know that Wilson was accepted in the rehab program?" commented Dr. Chen casually. "You are working as a volunteer at an immigrant integration center, without salary, of course. He said you taught you the true meaning of being American." Raphael considered the information. There was something poetically fair to Wilson's idea by devoting his afternoons to help exactly the people who once discriminated against. Agent Thompson, who now drove the national implementation of the system, approached a folder. "Raphael, I need to show something. Data from the last 3 years are impressive, not just reduced discrimination, but we significantly improve safety efficiency. Mendoza airports detect 40% more real threats because agents can focus on genuine suspicious behaviors instead of racial stereotypes." Raphael's revenge had transcended personal satisfaction. He created a legacy that made the United States safer and more fair simultaneously. Morrison appeared soon in the news a few months ago when he was arrested for drunk driving. The man who once had the authority to stop people indefinitely now fighting to keep his driver's license. Its fall had been as brutal as its previous arrogance. Dr. Chen showed a last statistics on the tablet. "The mentoring program you created has helped 400 immigrant engineers get positions at American aerospace companies. And look, 5 of them have already deposited their own patents." Raphael nodded satisfied. The best revenge had not been to destroy Wilson and Morrison. It had been to build a legacy that would ensure that no immigrant children would ever go through what he went through. Transformed his personal pain into universal protection. While boarding his private jet, courtesy of the U.S. government, Raphael reflected on the journey. 16 years creating systems to protect lives, 6 months documenting injustices, and a moment of courage to turn humiliation into history. 3 years later, Raphael was not just a respected engineer, he was a national icon. His name was permanently recorded in American legislation as the author of the Rafael Mendoza Law to Protect Travelers, ensuring that his victory over prejudice was permanent and institutionalized. He has learned that true revenge is not to destroy those who hurt you. It is to achieve such a great success that their achievements make all attempts to diminish you insignificant. It is transforming your fuel pain that builds a better world for those who come later. If this story has touched you, subscribe to the channel and share it in the comments. Have you ever turned an injustice into fuel for your success? Sometimes our greatest enemies give us exactly the motivation we needed to rewrite not only our own history, but the story of an entire nation.